Actually, Turkey doesn't want Iran to take over everything. Israel doesn't want Iran to take over everything. And in fact, Israel actually stands up for themselves all the time.
We may end up being in a bigger war.
Let me finish. Don't interrupt.
The View is no stranger to fiery clashes and heated debates, but this time, the spotlight fell on none other than Senator Rand Paul. Known for his unfiltered opinions and willingness to challenge the status quo, Paul's appearance quickly turned into a verbal sparring match with the show's outspoken host, Whoopi Goldberg. From the collapse of socialism in Venezuela to America's withdrawal from Syria and Afghanistan, the conversation was as explosive as the topics themselves. Senator Paul began the conversation by discussing socialism, something that he is very passionate about. He has a book titled The Case Against Socialism, which discusses what issues he has with socialism and outlines why it is not the right answer for America. He mentioned that some people, like Bernie Sanders, in the US tend to admire Scandinavia for successful socialism. But those countries aren't socialist in nature. Denmark, for example, has private property, stock markets, and even has lower corporate taxation than the US. They also do not have a minimum wage, which is in sharp contrast to some of the proposals made by Bernie Sanders. The free stuff in Scandinavia, such as healthcare and education, is only free because there are such high taxes levied on the working and middle class.
We have massive taxes here, but we don't get any free stuff. We don't have free health care. Our public education system is a problem.
For example, there is a 25% sales tax and income taxes begin at 60% for people making approximately $60,000. As opposed to this, the U.S. taxation is a bit more progressive, which suggests that wealthy Americans pay most of the income tax. He said that the top 1% in the U.S. pays about 40% of income tax, and a large portion of people earning less than $50,000 do not pay federal income tax at all. The hosts, however, confronted his arguments, highlighting that a good amount of Americans still are in poverty and do not enjoy the benefits that are experienced elsewhere. Next, the lens shifted to Venezuela, and this is where Paul decided to abusively explain how socialism can fail.
Well, if you vote for a socialist, you might get socialism.
Come on, don't do that. Maduro is not a socialist. He's a corrupt, murderous thug who is starving his people.
That's not true.
The socialist policies adopted by leaders like Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro led to economic collapse, food scarcity, and great pain for many. Venezuela was once one of the wealthiest nations in South America, boasting vast oil reserves that powered its economy. However, in the late 1990s, Hugo Chavez was elected president, bringing socialist policies to the forefront. Chavez nationalized industries, expanded social welfare programs, and redirected the country's wealth toward reducing poverty and inequality. Initially, his policies were popular, but over time, economic mismanagement, corruption, and plummeting oil prices devastated Venezuela's economy. When Nicolas Maduro succeeded Chavez in 2013, things worsened. Hyperinflation skyrocketed, basic goods like food and medicine became scarce, and millions of people fled the country. While supporters of socialism argue that external factors like U.S. sanctions contributed to Venezuela's collapse, critics point out that socialist policies, including price controls and state monopolies, crippled the private sector and led to economic disaster. Whoopi Goldberg pushed back hard, defending socialism and criticizing Paul's stance. At one point, she flat out denied that Venezuelan leaders like Maduro were products of socialism, calling him a corrupt thug instead. Paul had a differing opinion and stated that even during Chavez, the country was pursuing socialistic policies, which was a precursor to the horror. Things got particularly tense when Paul tried to say that socialism got votes from Venezuelans. Both hosts interrupted, and it was all downhill from there, with both sides growing increasingly angry at one another. Paul headed towards foreign policy next. He's an outspoken critic of America intervening in several land acquisitions wars, and wasn't shy in voicing that. According to him, both American presidents Barack Obama and Donald Trump made electoral promises of reducing military engagements by America in foreign affairs. Wars like the one in Iraq simply spawned uncontrollable anarchy and terrorism, and the same foolishness was done in other nations like in Syria. The U.S. has often found itself involved in conflicts far from its borders, from Iraq to Libya to Syria. Supporters of intervention argue that it's necessary to combat terrorism, prevent atrocities, and protect allies. Critics, however, point to the unintended consequences, including power vacuums, prolonged instability, and loss of American lives. One of the frequently debated issues was the troop withdrawal decision from Syria, since it left Kurdish allies exposed to Turkish incursions.
Well, actually, if you look at the war is very complicated. So you had Assad on one side. On the other side, you had Sunni extremists, al-Qaeda and al-Nusra. These are the people that have been allied with the Saudi version of Islam that has been promoting Islamism and Islamist strategy around the world and jihadism. That was the side of the world we were fighting.
These are an ethnic group spread across Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, with no independent state of their own. In the fight against ISIS, Kurdish forces, particularly the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, became key U.S. allies. Their ground operations were instrumental in dismantling ISIS's territorial control. However, the Kurds have long faced hostility from Turkey, which considers the Kurdish People's Protection Units, YPG, to be linked to the PKK, a designated terrorist group. This complicated relationship created tension when the U.S. decided to withdraw troops from northern Syria in 2019. If you are liking the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Whoopi put Paul on a spot and asked him if America should have withdrawn so hastily from the region, for it seemed to signal the abandonment of its allies. While pulling the U.S. troops out of Syria, the Kurds were equally abandoned and left to die. Paul accepted the intricacy of the issue but remained with his point that the U.S. cannot act as the world's police. He equally pointed out the absurdity of parking a few of the troops in an unstable area. You don't go to war with 50 soldiers. The debate concerned the aftermath of the withdrawal, such as it is possible ISIS prisoners may escape since there will be no one to guard them other than the Kurdish forces which can't defend them. However, the situation on the ground is far more complex than what it seems according to Paul. Many groups in the region, including Turkey and the Kurds, have shifting alliances that make the conflict nearly impossible to navigate. Even the Constitution does not permit the president to wage wars without formally having Congress declaring the wars and sending soldiers to the battlegrounds. He argued that no one had been able to answer the question of who exactly the U.S. would even declare war on in these situations. One of the bloodiest wars America has ever fought was the war in Afghanistan began in 2001, following the 9/11 attacks, with the goal of dismantling al-Qaeda and toppling the Taliban regime that harbored them. Over 2 decades, the conflict became America's longest war, costing trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. While initial objectives were achieved, the mission shifted toward nation building, with efforts to establish a stable government and improve infrastructure. By 2021, the Biden administration announced a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops, fulfilling a deal negotiated by the Trump administration with the Taliban. The withdrawal, however, was chaotic. The Afghan government collapsed rapidly, the Taliban regained control, and tragic scenes unfolded at Kabul airport as people desperately tried to flee the country. This chaotic withdrawal sparked debate about whether the U.S. exit was mismanaged or if it was an inevitable consequence of a war that had long lost public support. Whoopi brought forth the issue of the turbulence surrounding the American 20-year intervention and the subsequent chaotic evacuation. Paul did criticize the evacuation, particularly the lack of such an operation for the first half of Trump's presidency. He pointed out how Democrats and Republicans alike did not manage to accomplish a quicker resolution to the military conflict. But didn't the U.S. have a responsibility to its allies, like the Afghan government and citizens who supported American efforts? Paul responded by saying that his responsibility, and the government's responsibility, is to the Constitution, and to avoid sending Americans into harm's way unnecessarily. What do you think of the interaction?